Here is a little bit more of a close-up look at A1, A2, and A3, but remember that A2 is called the belt, so that's this area here, under the rim of this structure, and then the part outside of that is called the parabelt, meaning it's close to or kind of like the belt, and that's A3. The tertiary auditory cortex, A3, or the parabelt, has more cognitive functions that are a little more top-down and higher level. Kind of like the color processing, color constancy stuff in the visual cortex that we talked about, where there's a little more context going on. It helps you process complex sounds like vocalizations, at least in monkeys. It's also very connected to the superior temporal gyrus, very close by, which is also connected to functions like social cognition and object recognition. So, maybe A3 helps you recognize whether sounds are coming from friend or foe, or helping you process how you're going to act on the language that you're hearing from another person. And maybe it helps you recognize what objects are the source of the sounds that you're hearing. It is also associated with word recognition in some studies. So we're doing some aspect of language processing here, but it's unclear what all this does, because you can see these are pretty diverse functions. Moving on from what specific areas of the cortex do, let's talk about sound localization. How do you tell where a sound is coming from? You may have noticed with your pets that they move their ears to do this. Cats kind of swivel their ears, dogs can lift and swivel their ears to do the same thing. Humans can't do this, but we can actually localize sounds better than cats or dogs. And how do we do that? Even though they have more sensitive ears, they can pick up quieter and different sounds. We are better at telling where the sounds came from. We do this partially through a timing difference. If sound is coming from my right side, it is going to hit my right ear before it hits my left ear, just split-second difference that I couldn't consciously notice, but on a deep unconscious level, my brain is able to process that. So it processes a timing difference. If there's a very short difference between what my two ears are hearing, it's because that sound is closer to my middle than one side or the other. If there's a big difference, it means it's more to one side or the other. We also use intensity differences. If a sound is on my right, it's going to be louder, and it's going to mean that it's closer to my ear. This works better for higher frequencies, not so much for those bass sounds. It's always harder for me to tell that when I hear bass, whether it's coming from the car outside or from my neighbor downstairs. There's also a phase difference. The peaks and troughs of the sound waves, when they hit your left and right ears, might not always be totally lined up. So, this helps you locate lower frequencies, not super duper low like bass and music, but like the lower frequencies of like speech and much music. If you're deaf in one ear, how do you tell where a sound is coming from? It is more difficult, but over time, your brain becomes a little more trained to notice intensity. So, you're going to notice a greater intensity in a sound that you're familiar with hearing, meaning it's probably on the same side as your good ear. Whereas it's just going to be quieter if it's on your deaf side. It's still going to hit your good ear, just at a lower level. There are also individual differences in how people hear and process sound, and we talked about some of those in the dyslexia part of last week's lectures as well. If you remember back to that, people with dysphonetic dyslexia also have trouble with their auditory attention and differences in connections between their auditory cortex and Broca's area and those types of things. Some people also have amusia, which is often called tone deafness. It's not literal tone deafness. They can hear notes apart from each other and tell which one is higher or lower. They have a harder time with those when they're super close to each other. If they're just a half step apart, like from a white key to a black key on a piano, they can't hear the difference between those. And so because of that, they can't tell if somebody is singing a little bit sharp, slightly too high, or a little bit flat, a little bit too low, off key. So if you're one of those people who can never tell whether you're singing off key, you might have amusia. It's in about 4% of the population. In people with amusia, it does not tend to improve with practice. It seems to be kind of a fundamental wiring difference in the brains where you have fewer connections between your auditory cortices and your frontal lobe that help you monitor error and things like that. So to tell when you're off with singing, you don't have those connections to allow you to do that. We also have an auditory cortex, what's called cross-modal plasticity, in the absence of input. So with vision, we may have talked about this in the previous week's lectures, or I asked you to read about it in the textbook. If your visual cortex receives no input from your eyes because you are blind, now your cortex is still good, let's say, but your eyes are what's damaged. There's some something in between there. Your visual cortex areas will then be taken over by somatosensation or your sense of touch. So you become much better at discriminating textures and shapes and things like that, and that's sort of how you represent the world is through touch if you are blind instead of using vision. Similarly, for deafness in auditory cortices, if you're getting no input from your ears, your auditory cortices are going to start to take over some visual functions as well. So you're going to get very good at visual and spatial cognition, which helps you process and create sign languages, helps you maybe pay even better attention to people's lip movements than a hearing person does, and those types of things. So it helps you overall with visuospatial working memory, which visuospatial working memory is going to make a little bit more sense to you if you've taken that cognitive class. If you have not, you will learn more about that later. So this is one of the places where courses connect very well. Now, you may have noticed that a lot of older people tend to lose their hearing, and this happens for a variety of reasons. And you may have some people who don't get access to or refuse to wear a hearing aid for a while, and then when they get one, they still don't hear well. What's happening is they're turning up the sound, but they still can't tell what people are saying. And that's because after a while, since their auditory cortex is not receiving enough input from the ears, and also with normal age-related decline, they have a harder time filtering out noise because they have fewer inhibitory neurotransmitters in an aging brain. They have a harder time filtering out noise and isolating the sound they want to listen to. Interestingly, music training can improve this. So the aging brain is a little less plastic, a little less able to adapt, but if you have an older person in your life who has the patience for this, they might try using an ear training app or learning some kind of basic use of a musical instrument, and that can help improve the attention to sounds better, so they can better distinguish what they hear. Now, for the older people in my life, like my father-in-law, who refuses to get a hearing aid, I know he's not going to do that. He's probably just going to continue to make us yell.